Flow, The Psychology of the Optimal Experience by Mihaly. Chapter 1, Happiness Revisited. 2,300 years ago, Aristotle concluded that, more than anything else, men and women seek happiness. While happiness itself is sought for its own sake, every other goal, health, beauty, money, or power, is only valued because we believe they will make us happy. Much has changed since Aristotle's time. Our understanding of the worlds of stars and of atoms has expanded beyond belief. The gods of the Greeks were like helpless children compared to the humankind today and the power we now wield. And yet, on this most important issue, very little has changed in the intervening centuries. We do not understand what happiness is any better than Aristotle did. And as for learning how to attain that blessed condition, one could argue that we have made no progress at all. Despite the fact that we are now healthier and grow to be older, despite the fact that even the least affluent among us are surrounded by material luxuries undreamed of even a few decades ago. There were a few bathrooms in the palace of Sun King. Chairs were rare even in the richest medieval houses, and no Roman emperor could turn on a TV when he was bored. And regardless of all the stupendous scientific knowledge we can summon at will, people often end up feeling that their lives have been wasted. That instead of being filled with happiness, their years were spent in anxiety and boredom. Is this because it is the destiny of mankind to remain unfulfilled? Each person always wanting more than he or she can have? Or is the pervasive malaise that often sours even our most precious moments the result of our seeking happiness in the wrong places? The intent of this book is to use some of the tools of modern psychology to explore this very ancient question. When do people feel the most happy? If we begin to find an answer to it, perhaps we should eventually be able to order life so that happiness will play a larger part in it. 25 years before I began to write these lines, I made a discovery that took all the intervening time for me to realize I had made. To call it a discovery is perhaps misleading, for people have been aware of it since the dawn of time. Yet the word is appropriate, because even though my finding itself was well known, it had not been described or theoretically explained by the relevant branch of scholarship, which in this case happens to be psychology. So I spent the next quarter century investigating this elusive phenomenon. What I discovered was that happiness is not something that happens. It is not the result of good fortune or random chance. It is not something that money can buy or power command. It does not demand on outside events, but rather on how we interpret them. Happiness, in fact, is a condition that must be prepared for, cultivated and defended privately by each person. People who learn to control inner experience will be able to determine the quality of their lives, which is as close as any of us can come to being happy. Yet we cannot reach happiness by consciously searching for it. Ask yourself whether you are happy, said J.S. Mill, and you will cease to be so. It is by being fully involved in every detail of our lives, whether good or bad, that we find happiness. Not by trying to look for it directly. Viktor Frankl, the Australian psychologist, summarized it beautifully in the preface of his book, Man's Search for Meaning. Don't aim at success. The more you aim at it and make it a target, the more you're going to miss it. For success, like happiness, cannot be pursued. It must ensue as the unintended side effect of one's personal dedication to a course greater than oneself. So how can you reach this elusive goal that cannot be attained by a direct route? My studies of the past quarter century have convinced me that there is a way. It is a circuitous path that begins with achieving control over the contents of our consciousness. Our perception about our lives are the outcome of many forces that shape experience, each having an impact on whether we feel good or bad. Most of these forces are outside of our control. There is not much we can do about our looks, our temperament, or our constitution. We cannot decide, at least so far, how tall we grow, how smart we will get. We can choose neither parent nor time of birth, and it is not in your power or mine to decide whether there will be a war or a depression. The instructions contained in our genes, the pull of gravity, the pollen in the air, the historical period in which we are born. These are innumerable conditions determine what we see, how we feel, what we do. It is not surprising that we should believe that our fate is primarily ordained by outside agencies. Yet we have all experienced times when, instead of being buffeted by the anonymous forces, we do feel in control of our actions, masters of our own fate. On the rare occasion that it happens, we feel a sense of exhilaration, a deep sense of enjoyment that is long cherished and that becomes a landmark in memory for what life should be like. This is what we mean by optimal experience. It is what the sailor holding a tight course feels when the wind whips through their hair, when the boat lunges through the waves like a colt, sails, hull, wind, and sea humming a harmony that vibrates in the sailor's veins. It is what a painter feels when the colors of the canvas begin to set up a magnetic tension with each other, and a new thing, a living form, takes shape in front of the astonished creator. It is the feeling that a father has when his child for the first time responds to his smile. Such events do not only occur when external conditions are favorable. However, people who have survived concentration camps or who have lived through near fatal physical dangers often recall that in the midst of their ordeal, they experienced extraordinary rich epiphanies in response to such simple events as hearing the song of a bird in the forest, completing a hard task, or sharing a crust of bread with a friend. Contrary to what we usually believe, moments like this, the best moments in our lives, are not passive, receptive, relaxing times. Although such experiences can also be enjoyable if we have worked harder to attain them. The best moments usually occur when a person's body or mind is stretched to its limit in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult and worthwhile. Optimal experience is thus something that we make happen. For a child, it could be placing with trembling fingers the last block on the tower that she has built, higher than she has built so far. For a swimmer, it could be trying to beat his own record. For a violinist, mastering an intricate musical passage. For each person, there are thousands of opportunities, challenges to expand ourselves. Such experiences are not necessarily pleasant at the time they occur. The swimmer's muscles might have ached during their memorable race. His lungs might have felt exploding, and he might have been dizzy with fatigue. Yet these could have been the best moments of his life. Getting control of life is never easy, and sometimes it can be definitely painful. But in the long run, optimal experience adds up to a sense of mastery, or perhaps better, a sense of participation in determining the content of life. That comes as close as what it usually meant by happiness as anything else we can conceivably imagine. In the course of my studies, I've tried to understand as exactly as possible how people felt when they most enjoyed themselves and why. My first studies involved a few hundred experts, artists, athletes, musicians, chess masters, and surgeons. In other words, people who seemed to spend their time precisely in those activities they preferred. From their accounts of what it felt like to do what they were doing, I developed a theory of optimal experience based on the concept of flow, the state in which people are so involved in an activity that nothing else seems to matter. The experience itself is so enjoyable that people will do it even at great cost, at the sheer sake of doing it. With the help of this theoretical model, my research team at the University of Chicago and afterwards, colleagues around the world interviewed thousands of individuals, many different walks of life. These studies suggested that optimal experience were described in the same way by women and men, by young people and old, regardless of the cultural differences. The flow experience was not just a peculiarity of affluent, industrialized elites. It was reported in essentially the same words by old women from Korea, by adults in Thailand and India, by teenagers in Tokyo, by Navajo shepherds, by farmers in the Italian Alps, and by workers on the assembly line in Chicago. In the beginning, our interviews consisted of interviews and questionnaires. To achieve greater precision, we developed with time a new method of measuring the quality of subjective experience. This technique, called the experience sampling method, involves asking people to wear an electronic paging device for a week and to write down how they feel and what they are thinking about whenever the pager signals. The pager is activated by a radio transmitter about 8 times each day at random intervals. At the end of the week, each respondent provides what amounts to a running record, a written film clip of his or her life, made up of sections from its representative moments. By now, over 100,000 such sections of experience have been collected from different parts of the world. The conclusions of this volume are based on the body of data. The study of flow began at University of Chicago has now spread worldwide. Researchers in Canada, Germany, Italy, Japan, and Australia have taken up in its investigation. At present, the most extensive collection of data outside of Chicago is the Institution of Psychology of the Medical School of Milan. The concept of flow has been found useful by psychologists who study happiness, life satisfaction, and intrinsic motivation, by sociologists who see it in the opposite of anomie and alienation, by anthropologists who are interested in the phenomena of collective effervescence in rituals. Some have extended the implication of flow to attempt to understand the evolution of mankind, others to illuminate religious experience. But flow is not just an academic subject. Only a few years after it was first published, the theory began to be applied to a variety of practical issues. Whenever the goal is to improve the quality of life, the flow theory can point the way. It has inspired the creation of experimental school curricula, the training of business executives, the design of leisure products and services. Flow is being used to generate ideas and practices in clinical psychotherapy, the rehabilitation of juvenile delinquency, the organization of activities in old people's homes, the design of museums, exhibitions, and occupational therapy with the handicapped. All of this has happened within a dozen years after the first articles of flow appeared in scholarly journals, and the indication are that the impact of theory is going to be even stronger in the years to come. Although many articles and books on flow have been written for the specialists, this is the first time that the research on the optimal experience is being presented to the general reader, and its implications for individual lives discussed. But what follows is not going to be a how-to book. There are literally thousands of such volumes in print on the remainder shelves of bookstores explaining how to get rich, powerful, loved, or slim. Like cookbooks, they tell you how to accomplish a specific limited goal, which a few people actually follow through. Yet even if their advice were to work, what would be the result afterward in the unlikely event that one did not turn into a slim, well-loved, powerful millionaire? Usually what happens is the person finds themselves back at square one, with a new list of wishes just as dissatisfied as the last one. What would really satisfy people is not getting slim or rich, but feeling good about their lives. In the quest of happiness, partial solutions don't work. However, well-intentioned books cannot give recipes for how to be happy, because optimal experience depends on the ability to control what happens in the consciousness moment by moment. Each person has to achieve it on their basis of their own individual efforts and creativity. What a book can do, however, and what one will try to accomplish, is to present examples of how life can be made more enjoyable, ordered in the framework of a theory for readers to reflect upon, and from which they may draw their own conclusions. Rather than presenting a list of do's and don'ts, this book intends to be a voyage through the realms of the mind. Charged with the tools of science, like all adventures worth having, it will not be an easy one. Without some intellectual effort, a commitment to reflect, think hard about your own experiences will not gain much from what follows. Flow will examine the process of achieving happiness through the control of one's inner life. We shall begin by considering how consciousness works and how it is controlled. Chapter 2. Because only if we understand the way subjective states are shaped can we master them. Everything we experience, joy or pain, interest or boredom, is represented in the mind as information. If we are able to control this information, we can decide what our lives will be like. The optimal state of inner experience is one in which there is order and consciousness. This happens when psychic energy or attention is invested in realistic goals, and when skills match the opportunities for action. The pursuit of a goal brings order and awareness, because a person must concentrate attention on the task at hand and momentarily forget everything else. These moments of struggling to overcome challenges are what people find to be the most enjoyable times in their lives. A person who has achieved control over psychic energy and has invested it in consciously chosen goals cannot help but grow into a more complex being. By stretching skills, by reaching towards higher challenges, such a person becomes increasingly extraordinarily individual. To understand why some things we do are more enjoyable than others, we shall review the conditions of flow experience. That's chapter 4. Flow is the way most people describe their state of mind when consciousness is harmoniously ordered and they want to pursue whatever they are doing for its own sake. In reviewing some of the activities that consistently produce flow, such as sports, games, arts, and hobbies, it becomes easier to understand what makes people happy. But one cannot rely solely on games and art to improve the quality of life. To achieve control over what happens in the mind, one can draw upon an almost infinite range of opportunities for enjoyment. For instance, through the use of physical and sensory skills ranging from athletics to music to yoga, chapter 5, or through the development of symbolic skills such as poetry, philosophy, or mathematics, chapter 6. Most people spend the largest parts of their lives working and interacting with others, especially with members of their families. Therefore, it is crucial that one learn to transform jobs into flow-producing activities, chapter 7, and to think of ways of making relations with parents, spouses, and children and friends more enjoyable, chapter 8. Many lives are disrupted by tragic accidents, and even the most fortunate are subjected to stresses of various kinds. Yet such blows do not necessarily diminish happiness. It is how people respond to stress that determines whether they will profit from misfortune or be miserable. Chapter 9 describes ways in which people manage to enjoy life despite adversity. And finally, the last step will be to describe how people manage to join all experience into a meaningful pattern. When that is accomplished and a person feels in control of life and feels that it makes sense, there is nothing left to desire. The fact that one is not slim, rich, or powerful no longer matters. The tide of rising expectation is stilled. Unfulfilled needs no longer trouble the mind. Even the most humdrum of experiences become enjoyable. Thus, flow will explore what is involved in reaching these aims. How is consciousness controlled? How is it ordered so as to make experience enjoyable? How is complexity achieved? And last, how can meaning be created? The way to achieve these goals is relatively easy in theory, yet quite difficult in practice. The rules themselves are clear enough and within everyone's reach. But many forces, both within ourselves and in the environment, stand in the way. It is a little like trying to lose weight. Everyone knows what it takes. Everyone wants to do it, yet it is next to impossible for so many. The stakes here are higher, however. It is not just a matter of losing a few pounds. It is a matter of losing the chance of having a life worth living. Before describing how the optimal flow experience can be attained, it is necessary to review briefly some of the obstacles to fulfilling implicit in the human condition. In the old stories, before living happily ever after, the hero had to confront fiery dragons and wicked warlocks in the course of a quest. This metaphor applies to the exploration of the psyche as well. I shall argue that the primary reason it is so difficult to achieve happiness centers on the fact that, contrary to the myths mankind has developed to reassure itself, the universe was not created to answer our needs. Frustration is deeply woven into the fabric of life. And whenever some of our needs are temporarily met, we immediately start wishing for more. This chronic dissatisfaction is the second obstacle that stands in the way of contentment. To deal with these obstacles, every culture develops, with time, protective devices, religions, philosophies, art, and comforts that help shield us from chaos. They help us believe that we are in control of what is happening and give reasons for being satisfied with our lot. But these shields are effective only for a while. After centuries, sometimes only a few decades, a religion or a belief wears out and no longer provides the spiritual substance it once did. When people try to achieve happiness on their own without the support of faith, they usually seek to maximize pleasures that are either biologically programmed in their genes or out as attractive by the society in which they live in. Wealth, power, and sex becomes the chief goals that give direction to their strivings. But the quality of life cannot be improved this way. Only direct control of experiences, the ability to derive moment by moment enjoyment from everything we do, can overcome the obstacles to fulfillment.